Welcome back to A History of Crosley Field. This is part 2 of a 3-part series, so if you haven't seen part 1 yet, click this card in the corner to get started. Other than that, like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get into it. With the Cincinnati Reds getting a new owner and their ballpark being christened with a new name, drawing greater attendance became the primary focus of the front office. Larry MacPhail, charged with alleviating this issue, realized that offering night games to his fans could be an excellent way to draw attendance given working hours lasted through the day. Following the 1934 season, he managed to convince Crosley to spend $50,000 to install permanent lights at his ballpark. 632 1,500-watt bulbs were installed atop 8 separate light towers positioned around the stadium, making Crosley Field the first stadium in Major League history to feature permanent lights. It should be noted that night games had been experimented with before in both the Negro Leagues and the minor leagues, but at that point in time, it had yet to have been tried in the majors. The lights were installed, and the first night game was set for May 24th, 1935, against the Philadelphia Phillies. According to Norm King, in his fantastic article about the game for the Society for American Baseball Research, the day was one of celebration, with pregame festivities including fireworks and music. The festivities lasted until sundown, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt from the White House in Washington, D.C., pressed a telegraph button that illuminated Crosley Field with over 1 million watts of light. National League President Ford Frick threw out the first pitch, and in front of a crowd of 20,442, the first night game in Major League history was off to the races. Paul Derringer took the mound for the hometown Reds, facing off against the Phillies' Joe Bowman. Derringer went the distance, only allowing a run in the 5th, while his team scored a run in the 1st and 4th innings. The score would hold at 2-1, and the Cincinnati Reds would claim victory in that historic night game. This new late-night time slot did wonders for attendance at Crosley Field. In 1934, the Reds drew a measly 206,773 fans. But in just 7 night games alone in 1935, they drew 130,337. At the end of 1935, total attendance at Crosley Field had more than doubled from the year prior, landing at 448,247. I would also like to note that the Sun Deck was rebranded as the Moon Deck for night games. A fun little bit of stadium lore. The rest of the 1930s ended up being quite eventful for our little old ballpark. A little more than a year and a half after the first night game, Crosley Field was struck with catastrophe. On January 24, 1937, the nearby Mill Creek overflowed, flooding the local area. Matty Schwab's revolutionary underground irrigation system backfired, flooding the field in over 20 feet of water. An absolute disaster. But a task not too tall for Mr. Schwab, who had the field drained and ready for play by opening day. The following season, Crosley Field played host to the first leg of one of the greatest pitching achievements in baseball history, when Johnny Vandermeer threw back-to-back no-hitters. The first game of this incredible feat took place on June 11th at Crosley Field against the Boston Bees. Then, just 4 days later, during Ebbets Field's first night game, he did it again. Less than a month after Vandermeer's no-hitters, Crosley Field had the honor of hosting Major League Baseball's 6th ever All-Star Game. In front of a crowd of 27,067, the National League dominated the game, nearly shutting out their American League opponents, but relenting 1 run in the 9th to win the game 4-1. Following the All-Star Game, the Reds wrapped up the season with a winning record for the first time in a decade, as a record 706,756 fans attended Crosley Field to cheer on their baseball team. Then, following that 1938 season, Crosley Field was given another makeover. The single-deck pavilions that extended down the foul lines had an upper deck added, and pavilion seating was extended further into foul territory. Home plate was once again moved forward by roughly 20 feet, and going into 1938, the ballpark featured dimensions of 328 feet down the left field line, 366 feet down the right field line, and 387 to dead center. When they opened up the 1939 season, Crosley Field featured an updated capacity of 29,401. Following the new renovation at Crosley Field, Mill Creek flooded again, submerging the stadium in water once more. Unfortunately for Matty Schwab, this time was too close to opening day, and the first 2 games of the year in Cincinnati had to be postponed. Despite a literally disastrous start to the 1939 season, the Reds cruised all year long. A record-smashing 981,443 fans entered Crosley Field to watch the Reds rip through the National League to the tune of a 97, 57, and 2 record, and their first pennant in 20 years. Edging out the St. Louis Cardinals by 4.5 games, the Reds met the mighty Yankees in the World Series. Amidst a streak of 3 consecutive World Series championships entering 1939, there was little the Reds could do to slow the Bronx Bombers down, quickly getting swept in the series. Crosley Field hosted Games 3 and 4 of the series, seeing the Reds fall 7-3 in Game 3, then lose a heartbreaker in extras in Game 4 to the tune of a 7-4 final in 10 innings. Despite the great season, the Reds just ran into a juggernaut, and the Cincinnati faithful had to suffer through watching the mighty Yankees celebrate on their sacred ground. The Reds didn't miss a beat in 1940, bouncing back from their World Series loss to the Yankees to capture their second National League pennant in a row. Hosting an impressive 850,180 fans throughout 1940, the team managed to improve on their record from the year prior by finishing with a 153-2 season, and claiming the pennant by a massive 12 games over the Brooklyn Dodgers. Their American League counterpart, for the first time in 5 years, was someone other than the Yankees. This time, it was the Detroit Tigers. Crosley Field was set to host games 1, 2, 6, and 7, and all 7 games ended up being necessary. The first 2 games, played in Cincinnati, were split, with the Tigers taking Game 1 and the Reds taking Game 2. The series continued the same in Detroit, with the teams trading off wins. Detroit in Game 3, Cincinnati in Game 4, and Detroit again in Game 5. Going back to Crosley Field for Game 6, the Reds had their backs against the wall, and needing a win to force a winner-take-all Game 7, manager Bill McKechnie turned to right-handed starter Bucky Walters to keep the team alive. Walters dominated the Tigers, pitching a complete game shutout as his offense put up 4 runs against 3 Detroit pitchers, setting up a decisive Game 7 the following day. On October 8, 1940, 26,854 fans arrived at Crosley Field to hopefully witness the Reds complete their comeback and win their second ever championship. With the series tied at 3, McKechnie gave the ball to Paul Derringer, and Detroit's manager Del Baker placed his team's hopes on the right arm of Bobo Newsom. Both hurlers went the distance, with Derringer giving up a single Tiger run in the 3rd, before his offense rescued him with 2 runs in the 7th. The score held, and the fans at Crosley Field got to witness, in person, the celebrating of a Reds World Championship. Unfortunately, this was the only time this would happen while the Reds called Crosley Field home. Following the second franchise championship, the Reds remained competitive for several years, but couldn't manage to get over the hump again. Crosley Field may not have hosted another World Series during the 1940s, but she did play host to some unique moments and players, as well as being subject to another expansion of sorts. August 29, 1943 sees the largest ever crowd show up at Crosley Field, as 38,017 fans turned up to watch the Reds beat the Cardinals 5-3. Just a year after that, the Reds treated their fans to the youngest debut in MLB history, when 15-year-old Joe Nuxhall debuts on the mound for the squad. Called in for a mop-up role in the ninth inning of a blowout loss at home to the first-place Cardinals, Nuxhall took the ball and towed the rubber for the first time on June 10, 1944. He managed to force a groundout on his first batter, but then all hell broke loose. Managing only one more out for the appearance, Nuxhall failed to get out of the inning, allowing 2 base hits, a wild pitch, 5 walks, and 5 runs across. He was immediately sent down to the minors and didn't return to the major leagues until 1952. Nuxhall would go on to have a solid MLB career for the Reds before becoming an iconic broadcaster for the franchise in his retirement. He was inducted into the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame in 1968. A couple of years following Nuxhall's debut, a new section of seating was added to the ballpark when team president Warren Giles adds roughly 700 seats in front of the sun deck. This new section of seating represented an animal pen and quickly garnered the nickname Giles Chicken Run, before just being shortened to the Goat Run. The temporary seating lasted until 1950, when Giles had it removed during a 16-game road trip. Though the Goat Run had no verifiable advantage or disadvantage for the Reds, their play arbitrarily improved following the removal of the section. Oddly enough, in spite of the Goat Run making Crosley Field more hitter-friendly, Reds pitcher Ewell Blackwell nearly matched Johnny Vandermeer's back-to-back no-hitters during the 1947 season. On June 18th, he no-hit the Boston Braves at Crosley Field, and just 4 days later, he came incredibly close to doing it again. Facing the Brooklyn Dodgers at Crosley Field, Blackwell got as far as an out into the ninth without giving up a hit, before the Dodgers' Eddie Stanky smacked a ball up the middle and ruined the night. It should be noted that the 2 franchises Ewell pitched against were, coincidentally, the same 2 that Vandermeer had back-to-back no-hit roughly a decade earlier. The Cincinnati Reds entered the 1950s wallowing in, at best, mediocrity. In 1951, team president Warren Giles left his post to become the president of the National League, and Powell Crosley promoted one Gabe Paul to team president. Within a year, Paul had decided to reinstall the Goat Run. The Reds featured several power-hitting prospects, including a left-handed Ted Kluszewski, and Paul believed the slightly shortened porch in right field could work to the Reds' advantage. While it's hard to discern if the Goat Run provided any real advantage at all, the Reds did objectively hit with more power throughout the decade, and it's quite likely that the Goat Run helped contribute to that. The year after the Goat Run was reinstalled, Crosley Field was awarded with the 20th MLB All-Star Game. On July 14, 1953, 30,846 fans packed into the ballpark to witness the best ballplayers from each league take each other on. Eerily similar to the 1938 Midsummer Classic, also hosted by Crosley Field, the National League took a shutout into the ninth before giving up a single run and closing the game out. This time, instead of a 4-1 National League victory, the margin was instead 5-1. This was the last time that the MLB All-Star Game would be held at Cincinnati's grand, intimate ballpark. 1956 saw the Cincinnati Reds smash 221 home runs as a team, establishing a new MLB single-season team record for home runs. It's quite possible that the shortened fence in right field contributed to this record, but in spite of that, just a year after setting that record, Gabe Paul had the GOAT run removed ahead of the 1958 season. Reds fans had widely believed that the GOAT run was a net negative for the team, and following a trade of Ted Kluszewski in 1957, it had little further use to the ball club. It was quickly removed with little pomp and circumstance. 1956 and 1957 were the only years through the decade that the Reds finished with a winning record, and the fans repaid them with attendance. 1956 was an exciting year as rookie Frank Robinson won the Reds' first Rookie of the Year award, and it was the first time that Crosley Field passed the million mark with 1,125,928 fans attending games. Then, they did it again in 1957, with 1,070,850 fans coming to Crosley Field. 1957 also saw the scoreboard replaced with an enormous 58-foot tall Art Deco style scoreboard that would become a key feature of the ballpark. As the 1950s drew to a close, there was little optimism that the Reds would soon play championship-level baseball. But in spite of the, at best, mediocre play on the field, the Reds faithful showed up day in and day out, establishing a one-of-a-kind baseball culture. Powell Crosley had returned the Cincinnati Reds to prominence and popularity, but unfortunately, his time was running out, and the early 1960s featured major management changes in Cincinnati. In 1960, he was approached by a group of investors who were attempting to bring National League Baseball back to New York in the wake of the departures of the Giants and Dodgers. Harkening back to his original reason for purchasing the team, his civic duty, Crosley refused to sell the team and allow them to be moved. This lack of stability, caused by a potential buyout, led Reds president Gabe Paul to step down, accepting the same position with the new expansion Houston Colt 45s. Crosley quickly filled that position with decades-long baseball executive Bill DeWitt. DeWitt immediately began making moves to shore up a roster that only managed 67 wins in 1960. After weathering a storm of an offseason, things were looking up in Cincinnati. And that is when tragedy struck. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of our exploration of Crosley Field. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you're looking for more ways to support the Bad Baseball Fan, consider becoming a member of the channel or browse through our merch linked below. Anyways, I'll see you next time, and remember, if you like baseball, like this video and subscribe for more.